So thank you. I was going to say a few things that if Paul heard, it would be okay, but it's not necessary for him to hear. So I'll use the time to give some kind of context for this talk. So the Arizona portion of this project, this NIFA project, has focused on a part of Arizona that lies between Phoenix and Tucson.
I'm going to pick it up and turn it around just like I did last
That
time.
has been highly agricultural over time and remains a major area for agricultural activity that was historically reliant on groundwater and then had surface water available to it when the Central Arizona project came online. And now with the issues of the Central Arizona, Colorado River, things have changed. And so I suggested to the organizers of this meeting that it would be important, first of all. Hi, Paul. Can you hear us?
Sharon Megdal's introducing you. Hang on a second.
Yeah. So hi, Paul. Great that you're here. And I'm giving a little background. I just talked about the area that we're focusing on this project, which Paul will talk about. And so it's a highly agricultural area, historically totally dependent on groundwater. Then it had some surface water. And now he'll tell a bit about the story of where it is. And so it's, first of all, this is the only segment of the program that's about Arizona. And so I did think it was important to have Arizona represented on this program. And so, we're dealing with issues there. And Paul's going to talk about it. I'm going to give him a proper introduction in just a second. But what we've worked on in this project over the years is that we've had soil health specialist Debunker Sanyal be working on cover cropping and things like that in the area. There's been some other work that's actually not been done through my budget, but in Arizona, looking at some of the irrigation practices and crops. They're not represented here today. But Bibas, I checked with him, he's got a poster today. So Bibas back there, who's with Tom Harder's lab as a postdoc, right? Bibas? Yeah. He's done some amazing modeling of the area and what's happened with nitrates in this part of Central Arizona. Paul's not going to talk about that. He's a lawyer. He probably hasn't seen it, but it's really interesting. So I encourage people to go look at Bibas's poster. So what Paul's going to talk about, and it kind of goes back to what Carl pointed out earlier, is that with everything we're dealing with physically and hydrologically, there's a lot of stuff going on in the policy world and things that are impacting the water available, particularly to this region in Central Arizona. So I had suggested Paul Orme. He's a distinguished attorney who's represented for many years irrigation districts in Central Arizona. He also has a lot of experience testifying, presenting on behalf of agriculture. Most recently, he did a stint as the president of the Family Farm Alliance after the long-term president, Pat O'Toole, passed away, and just stepped down from that role, I think very recently, Paul, still on the board. And he's guest lectured for my class. Maybe that's the most notable thing. So it points to he's really, really knowledgeable and an excellent presenter. And I will turn it over to you now, Paul, and I'll only come back to help with questions if there are some. And I hope our technology works, but Charles is going to help with that.
So you can share your screen whenever you're ready.
Okay. Thanks, Sharon, for that introduction. You basically mentioned everything I was going to mention, so I can probably get started. I'll just reiterate. I'm delighted to be with you today. I'm always very supportive of everything that Sharon Megdal does for the University of Arizona. I am a proud graduate of the law school, University of Arizona Law School in 1980. And so I've been representing these Pinal County irrigation districts for about the last 45 years. I'm partially retired, I should probably add, since I'm going to be talking quite a bit about the Colorado River shortages and the ongoing negotiations for the post-2026 guidelines, that I am not on the front lines of these negotiations. I am involved in an Arizona advisory group, but I'm not necessarily privy to the very most up-to-date parts of the actual negotiations between the 7 states and the tribe. So with that qualification, I'll get started. So let's go to the first slide, Charles, if you please. So a little background on the Colorado River Basin. It's made up of 7 states. The 4 upper basin states are Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. The 3 lower basin states are Arizona, California, and Nevada. And then portions of northern Mexico make up the Colorado River Basin. It supplies water to 40 million people, including major urban areas, Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, San Diego, Denver. And it delivers water to 30 tribes, 22 of which are located in Arizona. It irrigates over 5 million acres of farmland and includes 60 million acre feet of storage capacity, 50 million of which is located in the 2 large reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, that you'll see on the next slide. It also provides hydropower for the Western Power Grid and supports national parks, wildlife refuges, and recreation areas and monuments. Next slide, please. This is a shot of the reservoirs in the basin. The 2 very large ones in the lower basin, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, they're the largest reservoirs in the west. And as I mentioned earlier, they combined, they hold roughly 50 million acre feet of water. The problem is that right now they're only at about 30% capacity, or a little over 15 million acre feet. And so that's causing a lot of the problems we're facing today, which, as you well know, are the result of drought and climate change, and really a much smaller Colorado River than what was available at the time when the river was originally divvied up. And we'll take a quick look at those, at some of those numbers in a minute. Switching, the next slide, please. Switching to just the Arizona-centric portion of this. This is a snapshot of Arizona's water budget. It's might be slightly dated, but it's still pretty close. 41% of Arizona's water supply comes from groundwater, 36% historically from the Colorado River, but my guess is it's a little less than that now because of the shortages. 18% from in-state rivers, and 5% from reclaimed water. Moving on to the next slide, please. Some key milestones on the Colorado River. You need to always start with the 1922 Colorado River Compact. This was the first agreement among the basin states. It apportioned roughly 8.5 million acre feet of beneficial use to the lower basin. That includes 1 million acre feet to Mexico, 7.5 million acre feet to the upper basin. And the upper basin had the obligation to deliver half of the Mexican treaty obligation to the lower basin. And the key provision here is highlighted that the upper basin's obligation under the compact is to deliver 75 million acre feet plus 1/2 of the Mexican treaty obligation to the lower basin over a rolling 10-year period. That means the upper basin has to make sure that enough water gets down into Lake Powell to be then released into Lake Mead to meet this delivery obligation. Arizona did not immediately ratify the compact until 1944. In 1928, the Boulder Canyon Project Act was passed. This authorized the construction of Hoover Dam and created Lake Mead, and it also set the allocations among the lower basin states. Arizona with 2.8 million acre feet, California with 4.4 million acre feet, and Nevada with 300,000 acre feet. Again, much of this was based on the irrigable land that could receive water at that time under a prior appropriation type of doctrine. There are almost immediate disputes between Arizona and California as to whether Arizona's entitlement included just the main stem of the Colorado River, or also that you had to include tributaries within Arizona to the Colorado River, such as the Gila River. That dispute was ultimately resolved in the case of Arizona v. California, which I'll talk about in a minute. But if I'm staying in chronological order here, I have to relate this. Whenever I speak to any kind of California-centric audience, I have to relate the story of the Arizona Navy versus California in 1934. This was a Stop Parker Dam initiative that the Arizona governor at the time, B.B. Moore, initiated. California had started to build Parker Dam so it could divert its Colorado River entitlement into California, into the Imperial Valley, into Los Angeles for municipal use. And Arizona feared that California would basically end up taking Arizona's supply as well. So the governor of Arizona dispatched 60 fully armed Arizona National Guardsmen and dubbed them the Arizona Navy. And they commandeered a paddle wheeler down in Parker, Arizona, right on the river, named the Julia B, to stop the construction of Parker Dam. And Charles, if you just go through the next couple slides, they'll show you the famous Arizona Navy, and maybe end up on the last slide with the Admiral of the Navy showing. This is a story from the era of this particular event of the Arizona Navy versus California. The admiral of this Navy, as proclaimed by newspapers across the West, was a bigger-than-life pistol-packing Arizona state legislator by the name of Nellie Bush. She also held the title of being issued the first riverboat pilot license to a woman in the United States in 1920. Not long after the fleet was launched to patrol the construction of the dam and prevent work from reaching Arizona, some of the Arizona Navy boats got tangled up in cables near the construction site and had to be rescued by the Californians. Construction of the dam was halted by the U.S. Secretary of Interior until a compromise could be worked out by all parties involved. And ultimately, an injunction was issued by the U.S. Supreme Court prohibiting anyone from interfering with the construction of the dam, which was finally completed in 1938. So that's the one and only incident of the Arizona Navy. But again, it kind of highlights the tensions over water and the Colorado River in particular between Arizona and California. Those tensions, of course, were exacerbated during the 12-year Supreme Court case of Arizona v. California. But after a decade of deliberation in that case, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Arizona, saying that its 2.8 million acre foot entitlement was to the actual main stem of the river and did not include the tributaries to the river running through Arizona. This was a great victory for Arizona, and the case also effectively established that the U.S. Secretary of Interior would be the water master for the lower basin. This is particularly important under current conditions because the extent of that authority has never really been tested. But it's very possible that under these new guidelines that are being negotiated, and if a successful negotiation among the states cannot be reached, the Secretary of Interior will designate their own solution, their own operating guidelines, and the question becomes: will the Secretary be able to impact Section 5 contract provisions for some of the high priority water users? Will he have any authority at all over the upper basin? Those kinds of questions are going to be will undoubtedly be dealt with at the Supreme Court level if, in fact, the states can't reach an agreement on the next set of guidelines. California got its revenge, however, in 1968 with the Colorado River Basin Project Act. That was the act that authorized the construction of the Central Arizona Project. But due to the influence of the large California delegation, the Central Arizona Project, or CAP as we call it, received a lower priority for its Colorado River allocation, a 1968 priority. This has a resounding impacts today with the existing and future Colorado River shortage water delivery reductions, and in particularly in Pinal County, Arizona, which is where most of my law practice has been centered, and will have impacts as well on groundwater pumping in the state of Arizona, which I know is something you all have been focused on. So switching, that's enough of the historical background, switching to the current situation. Currently, shortage reductions in the lower basin are dealt with through the 2007 guidelines, which expire at the end of this year, and the drought contingency plan, which was adopted in 2019, much of which expires, but not all, which expires at the end of this year. This chart shows the cuts that the three lower basin states in Mexico have to take in the event tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 shortages are determined. Those shortages are based on the level of Lake Mead established at the end of the calendar year for the following year. And as you can see by the circled Arizona totals and California totals, Arizona takes much larger reductions, up to 640,000 acre feet, before California takes any reduction. And most of this all dates back to that priority language that I referenced in the 1968 Act. Nevada and Mexico take some degree of shortages, but their allocations are smaller, and their shortages are nowhere near as significant as Arizona's are. The next slide, please, shows how CAP absorbs these shortages, and this establishes really the issues that the CAP agricultural irrigation districts are facing today. When just the 2007 guidelines were in place, if there was a tier 1 shortage, and you can see the chart on the left, the agricultural pool, the water pool that these irrigation districts receive CAP water out of, was roughly cut in half. And in a tier 1 shortage was when Lake Mead dropped below level 1075. Below 1075. A tier 2 shortage with Lake Mead dropping below 1050 was about a 3/4 cut to the ag pool, and a tier 3 shortage with Mead dropping farther would eliminate the ag pool altogether. But the higher priority CAP pools, the Indian and M&I priority and what we call the NIA priority, would not have been too badly impacted. That changed with the passage of the drought contingency plan in 2019. Then additional cuts were imposed in an effort to keep Lake Mead intact, or as much intact as possible. And with the additional 192,000 acre feet that Arizona took almost right out of the box when Mead was below 1090, it eliminated once you reached a tier 1 shortage, it eliminated the ag pool altogether, and the other shortages began to eliminate the NIA priority pool. And that's where we find ourselves today in 2026. There really hasn't been any ag pool water for the last several years, and the NIA priority pool is being impacted this year to I think to maybe something like 182,000 acre feet. I'm not exactly sure on that exact number, but the NIA priority pool is taking a significant reduction, even though we are still only in a tier one shortage. What that chart translates to for Arizona is shown on the next slide. These are the cuts that Arizona faces under the current guidelines and the DCP. And right now we're in the tier one situation where the 512,000 acre foot cut that has that has eliminated all of the agricultural pool, as I referenced previously, and is impacting to some degree the NIA pool as well. The NIA pool was the original allocation that went to the irrigation districts. They ultimately, for a variety of reasons, relinquished those allocations to take a lower priority allocation at a less expensive price. The cities and tribes have mostly picked up that NIA priority, but they are finding that priority is being impacted to some degree this year and will certainly be impacted to a much greater degree in the future. Moving on to Pinal County itself, the area that Sharon mentioned that is my primary focus. This is a map showing the various irrigation districts in Pinal County. The large purple area at the top is the Gila River Indian Reservation, which actually has its own irrigation district. It has not been highly impacted by the shortages thus far and the reduced deliveries because its water supply has an Indian priority, which is one of the highest of the CAP priorities. It does have some NIA priority water, which is currently being impacted this year, I think, for the first time since there's no mitigation. Below the Gila River Indian Community Reservation, you have the Pinal County irrigation districts. I'm really just focusing on the two large ones, which I have represented for many years. The one in yellow is the Maricopa Stanfield irrigation district. And then the one in green is the Central Arizona Irrigation and Drainage District. They combined had roughly 60% of the agricultural pool of water. And the Pinal County districts in general had about 70% of the CAP agricultural pool of water. Again, that pool has been cut entirely over the last few years through the reduced deliveries based on the 2007 guideline and DCP reductions. Agriculture is a very important part of the Pinal County economy. December 2018 study by the University of Arizona Department of Economics and the U of A Cooperative Extension compiled these statistics. I'm not going to go through the time of reading them all, but suffice it to say that the major dairies in Pinal County contribute most of the milk sales to the Phoenix and Tucson areas, and also most of the cattle and calf sales come through Pinal County feeders. Both those operations, the dairies and the feeders, require a significant amount of farm ground to provide the feed for the cattle and dairy cows. And so that is where much of the water of these districts has gone over the years, is to supplying the water to these dairies and these feedlots, so they didn't have to import expensive feed from other parts of the state or the Southwest. Again, that's starting to change because the districts no longer can irrigate anywhere near the amount of ground they have historically. That point is underscored by the next slide, which focuses on these districts that I have mostly represented. This is a 3-year snapshot of each district showing what they were delivering and how much of that delivery was CAP water. So for example, in Maricopa Stanfield, you can see in 2021, when we were in what we call a tier 0 shortage, the district delivered 250,000 acre feet, 107,000 of which was CAP. In 2022, we went to a tier 1 shortage. The district delivery was reduced to basically 199,000 acre feet, but only 30,000 acre feet of CAP. Then we got into a tier 2A shortage in 2023, and the district was delivering 187,000 acre feet of water, only 4,000 of which was CAP. In all these cases, the remaining deliveries are groundwater. In the last 2 years, the district has only been delivering about 2,000 acre feet of CAP water and about 165,000 acre feet of groundwater, 165 to 170,000 acre feet of groundwater. The Central Arizona district is very similar in that regard. You can see their water delivery numbers over the last 3 years, and their CAP has also been reduced in the last 2 years to roughly 3,000 to 4,000 acre feet, and they're delivering about 165,000 acre feet of groundwater. The New Magma district, which is listed here, is a little different because it's in the Phoenix active management area, not the Pinell active management area. So it gets some what we call groundwater savings facility storage water. So it gets to store some water for higher priority users who get credits in the Phoenix AMA. But even when that water has become less available because of the tier 2A shortage in 2023, their water deliveries were almost cut in half. And they are still now delivering something in the 36 to 40,000 acre feet a year range. They're a much smaller district than the other 2 larger districts. So that shows you a fairly significant impact that these water reductions, because of the shortages on the Colorado River under existing guidelines and rules, have had on Pinell County agriculture. Maybe a more impactful graph is the next one, which shows you the blocks of water deliveries in the Maricopa Stanfield district, where the lighter blue was our CAP deliveries beginning in start. The CAP deliveries actually began in the late 1980s, early 1990s, but this chart just runs a 10-year period from 2014 through 2024. But you can see the CAP deliveries were the majority of the deliveries up to 2019. And then since then, they've been reducing pretty significantly to now groundwater is about 98%, and CAP is only about 2%. And you can also see the significant reduction in the availability of irrigation water overall. The groundwater deliveries have increased somewhat, but not hugely, given the reduced CAP water. We've been asked, just recently, we were asked by the governor's office for some statistics on what the actual land fallowing has been in these districts. And an example would be in Central Arizona in 2020, roughly 80,000 acres were irrigated. And in 2025, there were 37,000 acres irrigated. That's about a 60% fallowing rate. I would say Maricopa Stanfield's closer to a 50% fallowing rate, but these reduced water deliveries have been significant from the standpoint of having irrigable land in these districts be fallowed. So what are the impacts of this reduced CAP water and the increased use of groundwater? One is efficiency. The district's delivery systems were built to deliver high head flows from with CAP water. They were not built to exclusively deliver groundwater. So those systems have had to be retrofitted to some degree to efficiently deliver groundwater. There's areas in the districts that are not capable of receiving groundwater, so there's been efforts on trying to connect pipelines and wells to get at least some degree of water to those areas so they don't go completely fallow. But it's been a difficult slog for the last few years. Obviously, with the significantly reduced water deliveries, your per acre foot costs increase. That's what we've seen in all these districts because of the O&M costs don't decrease at the same level the water deliveries decrease. Farmers have had to go to more short-term cropping plans given the volatility of water deliveries, not knowing if they'll have some degree of surface water or CAP water. With the concern about increased pumping in the districts because of the loss of CAP water, there is more tribal and state and federal government oversight of the districts, but the districts are well within their allowable groundwater pumping levels, both under state and federal law and contract. And frankly, I don't see them ever even approaching their maximum pumping abilities given other infrastructure issues and challenges. There's also been an on-farm and county-wide economic impact because of the significantly reduced agricultural production in Pinell County. We have these groundwater transition issues I've referenced already. Most of the farmers in Pinell County have no other alternative to CAP water other than groundwater. But as I mentioned earlier, the delivery systems were designed to move CAP water, high head flows. So lots of infrastructure retrofitting and other infrastructure has to be developed to make these new systems at least partly workable. Some districts had no control over the wells and have never delivered groundwater, so they have really found it difficult to operate with the real significantly reduced amount of CAP water available to them. So what's been happening in the last few years with respect to the groundwater situation? Well, both Maricopa, Stanfield, and Central Arizona have had extensive state and federal funding in an effort to develop and make their groundwater supply as efficient as possible. You can see these charts on these next two slides show the wells that have been drilled, repaired, or rehabbed within those districts, both reaching well into the 230s in one district and nearly 290 in another. Now, I should add that this has not produced a lot of new water because much of this is just ensuring that the water the district could produce is moved efficiently to areas that had not gotten groundwater before. So this really doesn't show a huge increase in groundwater pumping per se. This is more an increase in rehabilitating wells that maybe hadn't been utilized because there was easy access to CAP water, and repairing other wells and making other wells more efficient. So it's interesting to note that you would intuitively think, okay, boy, if they're putting money into 230 wells or 290 wells, they're going to be pumping a lot more groundwater, but that has not been the case we've seen. We've seen maybe an increase of 2,000 to 3,000 acre feet more of groundwater pumping. We hope to be able to do more. Like I said, we're well within our legal rights, but it's a huge infrastructure challenge to efficiently manage groundwater in these districts. So, what are the long-term solutions? From a statewide standpoint, some of the Arizona solutions are augmentation, finding new water supplies. The state is looking at certain desalination projects with California and Mexico. The state's looking at brackish groundwater potential. There's CAP is looking at an agreement with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California to help with their recycling in return for some of their Colorado River supply. There's always efforts to become more efficient from a conservation standpoint. There's grants to help farmers and others become more efficient. There's a pretty strong movement in Arizona for that. Reuse is always being studied, and recycled water is increasing in Arizona. And then there's recovery operations within Arizona, water that's been stored underground. Um, and then finally, there's integrated infrastructure, such as the integrating the systems, the Salt River Project and the Central Arizona Project. The fact of the matter, though, is that most of these long-term solutions and these new water supplies will be way too expensive for agriculture in Arizona. So while finding new water for Arizona is a good thing, I think, agriculture will only benefit if possibly some of that water gets stored in these irrigation districts. But these districts will not financially be able to contract directly for any of these new supplies. Finally, on the status of the post-2026 Colorado River guidelines, the states, the 7 basin states and the tribes have not been able to work out an agreement to date. There may be some breakthrough coming. They have till the middle of February, according to the Department of Interior, to reach an agreement. But nevertheless, Reclamation has moved forward with the draft environmental impact statement and has identified 5 alternatives that Reclamation will consider, but has not named a preferred alternative, which is the usual practice under a draft environmental impact statement. They've just kind of left those 5 alternatives hanging. Reclamation would still prefer the basin states to come up with an agreement. They really don't want to have to impose their own agreement. But to date, after years, frankly, of negotiations, that has not been successful. Maybe the February 15th deadline will trigger something. You never know, really, but there hasn't been much optimism to date. The next slide shows what the draft EIS alternatives are. I'm not going to get into discussing those in any detail. The EIS is about 2,000 pages. The executive summary is 68 pages. All of the options provide some level of Colorado River water delivery reductions in the lower basin, either depending on the levels of Lake Powell and Lake Mead, or on the total system contents measured at a 3-year average at Lee's Ferry. Several of these theoretically could lead to Central Arizona Project receiving no water, which would have a hugely negative impact on the Arizona economy. And certainly here in Arizona, we're going to fight for an alternative that does not make the CAP go dry. That would just be catastrophic for the Arizona economy. Some of the Arizona commentators have made the following comments. The alternatives don't really seem to even consider compact compliance by the upper basin as required by the 1922 compact. This is a big concern for Arizona folks. Some of the alternatives would make lower basin deliveries even lower than upper basin deliveries, which is not reasonable at all, given the lower basin has much greater population and many more irrigated acres from the Colorado River than the upper basin has. Arizona takes the lion's share of cuts under almost any lower basin cut scenario, but the degree of those cuts would depend on whether they're all based on priority or pro rata. I should say the degree of the cuts that CAP takes are all based on whether the cuts are priority based or based on pro rata, as some in Arizona are proposing. There's an obvious impact on federal hydropower. If water gets too low and can't be released from the dams, which would have a hugely negative impact on a lot of folks. And lastly, Arizona makes the point that the draft EIS puts no pressure on the upper basin states to come to basically come to the table and agree to take some future shortages based on the amount of water overall in the system. So I suppose you can get the feeling that Arizona isn't really happy with any of the 5 alternatives and is hopeful that some degree of agreement can be reached among the states, and that not one of these gets imposed on everyone by the Department of Interior. My last slide, I'm trying to address the organizer's question here is, as to post-2026 Colorado River operating guidelines, what would be a fair and equitable solution? Again, my viewpoint is by no means an Arizona viewpoint. It is just my own impressions from 10,000 feet above. I'm not a party to the negotiations, but whatever the lower basin shortages would turn out to be, and I do believe the upper basin should share in some degree in extreme shortages, but whatever the lower basin shortages should be, I think all the lower basin states should share in evaporation losses. That is a real problem to the high priority 1 and priority 2 folks on the river, both in Arizona and California, because their Section 5 contracts provide their allocations for consumptive use and don't require them to assume any of the significant evaporation losses that occur in Lake Mead and in the river as the water travels from Lake Mead down to Arizona and into California. But in my mind, it would be shared for everyone to share in evaporation losses. After evaporation losses are applied, I think additional cuts should be based on priority. Again, that doesn't please all CAP users who really feel all cuts should be pro rata and not based on priority. But that really doesn't make sense under Arizona water law or Western water law altogether. So I do believe that, again, everyone should share in the evaporation losses, but after that, the cuts should be based on priority, and that the highest priority contractors should be paid for releasing water to the lower priority users. In this case, that's often the farmers in the Imperial Valley and in the Yuma area who have the highest priority would be paid by the major municipalities for some of that water. What I hope, and I'm putting on my Family Farm Alliance hat here, is that this doesn't lead to the permanent fallowing of even more agricultural lands than what we're already seeing for the loss of water under the current mandatory cuts. Agriculture is very important to this country. The last slide here is a picture of me testifying before former Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack in Phoenix, where I was testifying on behalf of the Family Farm Alliance and the importance of agriculture in the West and to feeding not only the nation but the world. And of course, Secretary Vilsack made the comment, we're the only country in the world that can feed itself, and we need to stay that way. And of course, you all know that California is the nation's most productive state in the terms of agriculture, and that the Yuma area in Arizona provides 90% of the nation's leafy greens like lettuce and spinach during the winter months. Those are just two of the major statistics highlighting the importance of agriculture in the Colorado River Basin. So that's the conclusion of my PowerPoint. I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you all might have.
So thank you, Paul, and we're going to get your picture up there. Thanks so much. And I wanted to make a couple comments before, and he told me not to stand in front of the speaker. That's when you get the reverberation. Related to the presentation, and then see if there are any questions. Number one, when Paul showed the map of the irrigation districts in the colors and the Indian reservations, those of you who were in Phoenix when we had our symposium 2 years ago, we went out and visited the Ak-Chin Indian community. And so we saw their lands, but we also saw a part of Maricopa Stanfield, which abuts right there. So some of you saw some of those farmlands. I did want to mention that the water situation for some of those Central Arizona Indian tribes are different than the irrigation districts. And in fact, Ak-Chin has higher priority rights than Central Arizona Project generally. And Paul, as you know, there's the real question, how do they get their water from the settlement if there's hardly any water to push through the canal? So I think a lot of people will be watching, what goes on. I did want to also mention that according to Arizona's Groundwater Management Act, that agriculture has some of those rights. Paul mentioned they're not exceeding those, so there's not an issue with that. But those rights are in perpetuity, so they do have the right to go back on the pump, provided they have the capacity to pump and it's economically feasible, which, those are always issues. In the context of this project, Isaiah will remember when we were conceptualizing it and naming it, and California likes to talk about sustainable groundwater use. In that region, we're not talking about sustainable groundwater use. And that's why I was always pushing for the sustainability of agriculture to be a focus for this project, because they are overdrafting the groundwater. And then the last thing I want to say is there may have been the fight with the Arizona Navy, and there may have been other skirmishes, but actually California, Arizona, and Nevada are in lockstep at this moment in time in these negotiations that Paul just mentioned at the very end of his presentation. So it's become more of an upper basin, lower basin thing for those of us who are watching it, right? I'm watching it like you are, Paul, versus Arizona, California, and all its fights over the years. So that's been a very positive development. So I just thought I would give a little bit of that kind of context to some of this. So are there questions? Jennifer's around with the microphone. If there are any questions for Paul, here. We've got Sharon up there, the other Sharon. Oh, and we have, I thought she had a microphone in her hand.
It's good. Here you go, Sharon.
Well, from one of the earlier slides, I guess California has higher priority. You just said that, it looks like California and Arizona, and I think you said Nevada will work together. I know these are legal things, but is it at all likely that, those priorities would shift? Because, like you say, the Colorado River is not what it was in previous years. And I know how water rights in California, we just can't seem to change anything. But is that likely because it's more of a federal agreement that, basically it would be more equitable, I guess, the rationing of that water in the river?
Well, there's an argument that it would, that would be more equitable, and that because at the time the river was originally divided, there was the assumption it was running at about 16 million acre feet a year. In recent years, it's clear it's running more like 12 to 13 million acre feet a year. So you would think everybody would need to take a haircut with respect to that. I think where Arizona, Nevada, and California are all on the same page is that it's pretty clear the lower basin is willing; those lower basin states are willing to take a 1.5 million acre foot cut out of their 7.5. Under most scenarios, unless there's some kind of huge reversal and somehow these reservoirs begin to fill up. But based on recent conditions, those 3 states have essentially agreed that they will take, a reduction up to 1.5 million acre feet. Some of those alternatives that I was showing that the Bureau of Reclamation just put forward would have cuts in the lower basin up to as high as 3 million or even 4 million acre feet, in which case the alignment between Arizona and California will fall apart, I promise you. When you cut something that deep, there won't be alignment then. Again, it's hard to imagine if you cut the lower basin by 4 million acre feet, you'd be giving more water to the upper basin. And as I mentioned, they don't have anywhere near the population, the irrigable acres, or the appropriative rights that the lower basin states have to the Colorado River. So I can't honestly see that happening, but that's what some folks would like to do. So the answer to your question is, I think even the hardliners in California at this point understand that the lower basin is going to take a 1.5 million acre foot cut. They do think that that cut's going to be pretty much based on priority. So CAP, as the lowest priority among that group, will take by far the largest cut. Again, if the cuts get bigger, which in all likelihood they will have to be, the 1.5 million isn't going to do it, unless there's some kind of drastic change in drought conditions. So there's going to be bigger cuts, and the question then becomes, how do those get shared? My point was, I think everybody in the lower basin should share in the evaporation losses, and that's not currently happening. That just falls on the low priority users. But to me, that's something that should be fairly obvious and agreeable. But again, the high priority folks have not agreed to that.
One more question. Is there another? Isaiah has a question.
Thanks, Paul. That was a great presentation. It was really interesting to see the number of followed acres, especially around central Arizona. What kind of land use is replacing agriculture? Is it urbanization? I also hear they are building data centers there. Where are they getting all the water to cool their servers?
There is some for the one district I showed you, the new magma district, which is in the Phoenix AMA, even though it's in Pinal County, there's a lot of urbanization going along in the edges of the Phoenix urban area. So they're losing land, a lot of irrigable land, to actual urbanization. You're not seeing a lot of that down in those areas of Pinal County that I really focused on, those 2 big irrigation districts. You are seeing some solar farms going in that don't take near the amount of water that the irrigated land did. You are seeing some data centers going in, their biggest challenge, I think, is finding the energy at this point. But you are seeing some of that happening with that fallow acreage. You're also just seeing a lot of fallow acreage, which in my mind is tragic, but that's what's happening.
All right. So would you all join me in thanking Paul? Thank you so much, Paul, for tuning in with us.